Did you know before Japan's economic reforms, the United States and Switzerland supplied the vast majority of the world's watches? Even though the Swiss were concerned about the disclosure of sensitive information. Still, word got out, and Japan established itself as a global leader in the watch industry. Hi there, I'm Megan, and welcome to our channel. If you're new, please subscribe and tap the notification bell to be updated for more upcoming videos like this. In this video, we'll take a look at the origins, development, and pinnacle of Japanese timepieces. And you won't want to miss the shocking reason that explains the Swiss defeat. So let's get started. The US and the Swiss held opposite ends of the watch market by the turn of the century. However, the two approached success very differently. A select few large companies in the United States, including Waltham Watch and Elgin Watch, produced hundreds of thousands of pocket watches for domestic use. The technology for screw automation was adapted from sewing machines to create these straightforward and expensive watches. On the other hand, the Swiss watch industry was the complete opposite. The industry was slightly more affluent because numerous small businesses produced a variety of high-precision timepieces. According to Swiss statistics, there were 663 watch companies in operation in 1901, employing 24,858 people. Only 853 were employed by Longines, the largest company. 130,000 pieces were produced by Longines in 1905. Just a few years earlier, Waltham was producing many more pieces each year. The diversity of Switzerland had been a strength, producing a wide range of goods to meet everyone's needs. They were all exported abroad. With roughly 93% of the market, Switzerland dominated the export of pocket watches. Japan quickly adapted Western technologies when it came to developing railroads, telegraphs, or the military. Modernization was the overarching objective of the government. They wanted to be as advanced as the West. Clocks, as part of a larger modernization trend, were therefore extremely popular at the time. When Westerners first began bringing watches into Japan in the 1860s, the country mostly regarded them as opulent items for the upper class. Only 300 pocket watches and 1,185 wall clocks were imported into Japan in 1868, according to official statistics. More than 700,000 clocks had reached Japan by 1887. They were put in public buildings like post offices, town halls, and hospitals. Japan tried to win itself off of American-made clock imports. The early Japanese clock industry concentrated on replicating clocks because they were more straightforward technologically than watches. The first modern clock factory in Japan was established in 1888 by watch retailer Hayashi Shihei. After its success, Hayashi established 5 additional factories in Tokyo, Osaka, and other cities. With production volume increasing from 370,465 pieces in 1905 to 1.2 million in 1922, Japan's clock industry quickly developed its ability to manufacture clocks. On the verge of World War I, there were over 20 clock factories. In the beginning, the market was propelled by demand from within the country, particularly the military. However, Hayashi began shipping its excess output to Far Eastern cities like Shanghai, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Bombay. By the 1930s, Japan had a 35% market share in the export of clocks. Around the same time, people began carrying pocket watches. Only 0.8% of Japanese people were thought to regularly wear watches in 1887. In 1897, that percentage increased to 4.2%. In 1907, it reached a peak of 10%. Japanese business strove to produce pocket watches as they became more popular. the largest of which was Hattori & Co., a Japanese business started by Hattori Kintaro. When Hattori was 13 years old, he visited a clock store in Tokyo to learn about the watch business. At the age of 17, he then opened his store in 1877, where he repaired and resold watches. He met the daughter of a watch dealer in 1881. He started selling imported Swiss and American watches after buying a store from his future father-in-law. He took the train to Yokohama's Sakuragicho station to meet with Swiss trading houses to sell his goods there. Hattori recognized an opportunity when the Japanese clock industry began to flourish and opened his factory in 1895, producing first high-end grandfather clocks and then wall clocks. He gave the name Seikosha to that factory. A sophisticated process that requires a lot of patience and skill is used to assemble the very small, precisely made parts of a mechanical watch. The parts that keep a watch ticking precisely are known as the movement or movement parts. Japanese watch manufacturers were unable to compete with the Swiss and American firms. They weren't as accurate, dependable, or thin as their rivals. Additionally, they are more expensive than their foreign rivals. For the Japanese factories to experience economies of scale, the selling quantities were not high enough. Because Japan and the United States signed an unfair treaty in the middle of the 1800s that opened up several treaty ports in the nation, these Western imports poured into the nation with such ease. However, that agreement expired in 1899, giving Japan back control over their trade relations. To discourage imports and safeguard domestic manufacturing, the Japanese government then immediately implemented an import substitution policy by raising tariffs. Before 1899, imports of watches made of silver and nickel were subject to a relatively low 5% tariff. Following that, those rates increased to 25% and then to 40% in 1906. The Japanese did the same thing with bicycles, machines, turbines for generating electricity, sewing machines, and cars. Hattori's watchmaking business flourished because it was shielded from Western imports. His watches captured 85% of the domestic market from 1906 to 1930, and his clocks were 48%. Government protection and high tariffs undoubtedly contributed to his success. But it's not the only one. Hattori's business increased production capacity by concentrating on automating a small selection of Swiss-inspired models. Between 1895 and 1937, the Hattori Company produced 25 different types of watches. Only 3 of those models saw strong sales: the 1909 Empire Pocket Watch and the Laurel and Seiko wrist watches. Hattori hired engineers from Tokyo universities to take apart Swiss watches and figure out how to put them back together. This helped him learn how to make these. Furthermore, he obtained raw watch parts from Switzerland that were exempt from tariffs. Switzerland supplied 69% of Japan's watch parts from 1915 to 1935. Named after the word Chablon, which means movement sets. This practice of first importing disassembled watch movement sets and putting them together within the borders was known as Chablonnage. Japan purchased 22,500 watch movements from the US and Switzerland between 1895 and 1899. Then Japan imported 122,000 movements in 1900s. The first year, finished watches were subject to tariffs. Then 250,000 in 1905. Japan was then importing far more watch movements than complete watches. The Swiss watch industry worried, reasonably so, that Chablonnage would eventually destroy the industry by giving other nations access to essential watchmaking knowledge. Here is an instance. Swiss national Rudolf Schmidt established a trading business in Yokohama in 1894. His business initially focused on importing and selling full watches, but after Japan increased the tariffs, it changed. After the second wave of tariff increases in 1908, he started bringing Chablons into Japan. Schmidt finished his watches in his Yokohama workshop using cases that were brought over from his family's Swiss watch case factory. Then in 1910, Schmidt transferred the entire procedure, including case making, to Japan, angering and alarming members of the Swiss watch industry. He relocated his Yokohama factory to Tokyo in 1912, where his business began to grow significantly. Under dubious and ambiguous circumstances, Schmidt bought Shokosha, a watchmaking workshop, in 1930. This workshop was renamed the Citizen Watch Company, which Schmidt had owned since 1918. Soon after Hattori & Co., or Seiko, Citizen would rise to prominence as Japan's second major watchmaker. Now, before we take a look at how the Swiss watch industry was defeated, please give a thumbs up if you're enjoying this video so far, and stay tuned until the end to know if Japanese watches continue to gain momentum in the watch industry around the world. Also, if you want to support this channel more, you might want to try our super thanks, wherein your comments will be highlighted, or join our membership program to support this channel. What happened in Japan was the worst-case scenario for the Swiss. Hattori's watch factory surpassed all others in size in 1935, and to make matters worse, Hattori and Citizen began growing internationally. Swiss watchmakers reorganized their industry into a cartel as exports fell throughout the 1920s. The watchmaking conventions that the component suppliers signed limit their ability to conduct business with one another. Schwag, a holding company, was established to acquire all the different movement manufacturers. The government intervened in 1934, eventually taking control of all watchmaking operations and overseeing all exports of machine tools and watch parts. Chablonnage was outlawed and largely succeeded in its objectives. The Swiss watch industry profited greatly over the ensuing decades and consistently held a 50% share of the world watch market. The market transition from pocket watches to wristwatches occurred during the 1930s as well. Self-winding mechanisms, calendars, and waterproof cases were also added to watches, while reducing in size and increasing in complexity. Then World War II broke out. Except for the Swiss, the majority of watch manufacturers halted production and saved their metals for the war effort. A lot of businesses were enlisted to make precision tools. The Swiss gained an advantage in the world market by remaining neutral. Following the war, American watch companies had trouble competing with imports of low-cost Swiss watches. The American watch industry entered a long-term decline and consolidation despite new tariffs from the US government. Hattori & Co. put a lot of effort into overcoming that post-war slump and competing against the Swiss on an equal footing. On their trips to Europe, they studied Swiss techniques and copied Swiss machine tools. They also exploited Cartel system weaknesses. By 1966, Hattori had succeeded in making mechanical watches that were on par with Swiss-made models in terms of performance. However, the business also aimed to market a brand new watch that would completely upend the mechanical watch industry. The Quartz watch is based on technology that has been around for a very long time. The legendary Marie Curie's husband, Pierre Curie, discovered in the 1880s that quartz crystals vibrate when subjected to pressure or alternating current, and it vibrates 33,000 times per second, which is a very constant rate. A property like this could be used to create timepieces that are much more accurate than mechanical clocks. Then in 1927, a Bell Labs engineer produced a large-scale, high-precision quartz clock. Although he hadn't intended for the device to be used for ultra-accurate timekeeping, he did acknowledge that it was capable of doing so. Since then, a quartz crystal manufacturing industry has developed to supply radios. The first commercial electronic watch was then released by Bulova, one of the two major American watchmakers still in business, in 1960. They unveiled the Accutron with a big marketing blitz across 13 US cities. Instead of being powered by quartz, Accutron made use of a 360Hz tuning fork. The watch required a fraction of the discrete parts of a mechanical watch and was 10 times more accurate. The Swiss scientist Max Hetzel, who created Accutron's technology, only turned to the American watch markets after failing to pique anyone's interest in Switzerland with his concepts. One of those instances of first-mover disadvantage was Bulova with the Accutron. Even after it became obvious that quartz was the future, they continued to use their tuning fork technology. The hotel juggernaut Loews eventually bought them out. But despite this, Accutron stunned the sector and sparked a technological upsurge in electronic watches across US, Japan, and Switzerland. A new team was established by Hattori, now Seiko, in 1959 to develop quartz timepieces for the market. Since the invention of the transistor, small circuits have been able to power quartz crystals, measure their oscillations, and convert them into second pulses. The Tokyo Olympics in 2020. No, it can't be that. 1964 was their first target for having a portable quartz chronometer in place. Somehow, this ragtag crew of mechanical engineers was able to ship this quartz-based electronic chronometer. They then started working on incorporating the technology into a watch. The watch they ultimately created was a jumble of oddly shaped parts. They developed a hand-soldered hybrid circuit using 76 transistors, 29 condensers, and 84 resistors because they lacked access to sophisticated integrated circuits. Seiko's initial in-house team had struggled to perfect the CMOS production process, so they contracted Intersil, an American company, to complete the work. After finishing the project, Intersil gave Seiko access to their process knowledge. Although Hitachi, NEC, and Toshiba, the nation's three largest producers, occasionally provided the capacity to Seiko, which produced the majority of their transistors internally. On Christmas Day 1969, the Seiko Astron SQ went on sale in Tokyo for what would be equivalent to $31,000 today. Although it had a plain, practical appearance, this elegant limited edition gold watch signaled a revolution. The slogan, "Someday, all watches will be made this way," was chosen by Seiko to promote Astron. They were accurate. Although Astron was revolutionary, its early sales figures did not light up the world. Hattori reported selling only 3,000 Astrons in 1971. Before they could storm the gates, digital watches needed another component. A company called Hamilton Watch was developing its quartz watch out in Pennsylvania. They eliminated the hands and dial and only displayed the time and date by utilizing a new technology known as light-emitting diodes. Years before the Apple Watch became a thing, Hamilton referred to their Pulsar as a wrist computer. In order to make up for the high production costs, it was first offered as a P1 version in gold. But when James Bond wore a P2 version in the motion picture Live and Let Die, it really took off. LED quartz watches had taken over the market by the middle of the 1970s. Analysts predicted that in a few years, the number of LED watches sold globally would increase to 10 million from the 650,000 units purchased in 1974. LCD watches would eventually replace LED watches, in part because they used less battery power. Numerous traditional watch companies and integrated circuit companies have flocked to the digital quartz watch market. They were eager to discover a successful application where they could market their chips. For instance, Texas Instruments offered a digital, solid-state LED watch in the same retail locations where their calculators products were sold for between $95 and $175. Even Intel briefly had a piece of the watch action. The business bought digital watchmaker Microma in 1972 and started producing smart watches. Another one of those businesses was Casio, which was founded as a maker of calculators. They competed head-to-head with US company Timex at the low end by selling their inexpensive models in pharmacies all over the nation. Japan's watch exports to the United States, a crucial market for Switzerland, have skyrocketed. In 1975, the export value increased by almost 10 times, reaching $26 million. Nearly 20% of all Japanese exports were watches. Switzerland's market share fell from 83% at the beginning of the 1970s to just 20% in 1980 as a result of stagnant exports. Japan exported $373 million worth of watches to the US in 1985. Watches from Seiko, Citizen, and Casio effectively drove Swiss brands out of their most lucrative market. Before the invention of the Astron, Japanese mechanical watches were on par with the Swiss watches in terms of quality. The fact that Hattori acquired Swiss technologies and know-how is evidence that export controls don't always function as intended. Although it was well aware of the technology, the Swiss watch industry bungled the transition to quartz. 2 years before the Astron in 1967, they had even showcased their prototypes. However, the Swiss were extremely proud of their mechanical heritage and their extensive industry structure, which consisted of numerous small businesses, worked against them. No single Swiss company possessed the means, the initiative, or the depth of knowledge necessary to construct such a thing. Making a mechanical watch that is also consistently accurate is challenging. You required skilled craftsmen and meticulous work. Modern semiconductor production techniques overwhelm all that human training with the titanic scale of a digital watch. The dominance of Switzerland over the watch industry was broken by quartz watches. They held 40% of the global market as late as 1974. 10 years later, only 10% of that share remained. More than half of the nation's watchmakers had filed for bankruptcy by 1983. Because they had to, the Swiss had also switched to quartz technologies. And for a brief time, it appeared that methods for making mechanical watches would be lost to the passage of time. But since then, the Swiss mechanical watch industry has made a little bit of a comeback, as consumers have realized the value of these products beyond simply telling the time. The Swiss created luxury watch brands after restructuring into the Swatch Group, and they have since prospered in their specialized market. Meanwhile, the 1980s were the absolute pinnacle of the Japanese watch industry. As a result of competition from China and then Hong Kong, the industry sold and moved its manufacturing overseas. Since then, they have fought to reach the heights of their heyday. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and share this video. Before we finally end this video, did you know that a Swiss company made one of the most expensive watches in the world? If not, then watch our video about the 20 most expensive watches to find out. Click and watch the next video here.